is Norwich Confidential with your hosts, Dr. Ben Hong, Bonnie Hong, and Mr. Bob Farwell. Yes, good evening. I'm Bonnie Hong, and Ben Hong is going to be here come on, you're not on camera. He's coming to get mic'd up. I forgot something at home, and he was gracious enough to go home and pick it up for me. And again, we're continuing our discussion on taxes. We've started with the federal tax and the budget, our federal budget, where the money is coming from and who it is actually serving. We have, last week we had Senator Kathy Ostin on, who gave us a very excellent overview of our state budget and all of the different programs that she has been working on, hopefully really trying to provide some real relief for property taxes, which is our, I think, everyone's biggest problem and biggest concern. Tonight, we're very lucky to have as our special guest our acting city manager, John Bilda. Good evening, John.
Good evening.
Good evening.
How are you?
John.
Good evening. Good evening. Yes, happy to be here. It's a pleasure.
We actually went through your budget, and as you can see, it's just
so
thick pages there.
This is what I forgot
And
at home.
I really got confused in reading some of them, but I'm glad that you're here, so maybe you can explain it to us.
Sure.
And to some of our listeners.
Right.
I'll
And
be
I
happy
think
to answer whatever questions you have.
Great.
I think we could start with just maybe by explaining how is the budget derived. First of all, you were kind of thrown into this just at the beginning of the budget season. So and we appreciate your taking over as the city manager, but how is it derived? How are the departments' budgets derived at? And then what is the whole process?
So you mentioned how I started with this process the beginning of February, but actually the budget process kicks off October 1st. So the city manager issues a memo to all the department heads, and it puts some criteria together in terms of what some goals are, where we want to be with things, in order to set the stage and how you craft the budget. So that whole process starts in October. By the beginning of January, we begin to roll up the numbers through the finance department with the city manager's department, and then we get to fine-tune things. We set up individual meetings with every single department head, and we work through what is aligned in the long-term capital plan. The city has a requirement to spend a certain amount of money of the general fund every single year on capital projects, so we line up those projects and figure out which ones make priority with each department head. And then we meet with the Board of Education also and have a discussion about what their plans are, capital projects that can get rolled into the budget, and how that dovetails in with the city's overall plan. So by the end of February, the beginning of March, we have a budget and we work on a presentation to the council. So by the end of March, a budget presentation is made to the council. So that's pretty much, the administrative staffs and the city manager's budget being presented to the council.
So after you really work the budget, and then it becomes your budget.
Then it becomes the city manager's budget. That gets presented to the city council. Then after that, there's by the third Monday or the third week in April, there has to be a public hearing on that budget. So then the city manager is able to collect information from the public, take it into consideration, make adjustments based upon the feedback that we've heard from the public at that public hearing, and then that budget is readjusted, then presented back to the city council again at the beginning of May. So after that first public hearing in April, it goes back to the city council from the city manager again, and then actually it becomes the city council's budget after that point. The management staff, the city manager, the finance staff are at that point reacting to things that the council want to see happen, feedback from the council. By the end of May, the city council needs to hold a second public hearing on the budget. So that provides, again, another opportunity for the public to provide input into the budget process and the numbers that are in the budget and concerns that they might have. So the manager hears from the public, the city council hears from the public, and then adjustments are made after that second time. And by the, the July 1st, by the third week in June, we need to have a budget approved. And we did just that this year.
Well, we're talking about 6 months worth of time from the beginning of creation to the time it was presented to the city council. And of course, by the time you presented it, you probably thought that, well, gee, this is really a work of art, and this is really one of the greatest budgets.
but you
then
also
you get
know
into
what
the
the
city
mill rate-
council,
what the
and
mill rate's
everyone
gonna
is going
be.
to say, hey, that's really totally different.
But the
type of
money,
numbers.
but let's stay with the money though. By March, you really know what the mill rate's going to be.
Out there being any of the changes, that's so. But with this particular budget, changes took place after my presentation. Significant changes took place to the budget. And you mentioned 6 months. You know, you commented on how big that budget is. That is 6 months worth of work.
It is thick.
There's a lot of time and energy by the department heads. The finance department is, you know, drilling down through numbers. We're trying to make projections. In some cases, the bargaining units, the organized labor in the city don't have contracts. We're in negotiations, so you don't know what those numbers are going to be. That could be true for the Board of Ed in some cases. In this particular budget year, you know, they had all their organized labor contracts were in place, so we could make solid projections. There are a lot of things that we weren't able to make solid projections. So there's a lot of moving parts in that budget.
Now, primarily what you're saying is that you're taking information coming from your head of departments,
Yes.
unions, and also maybe outside contractors. Are there any other things that you might be getting most of your information from?
Well, the big unknown thing also is the state budget.
Right.
You know, the revenue projections.
Exactly.
So one thing that the council doesn't have the ability, only the city manager can set the revenue projections. The council doesn't have the ability to change that. It can change anything it wants. On the expense side, it can't change the revenue projections that the manager puts in place.
How do you know, how do you come, how close were you?
So the budget that the city manager that I presented to the council was $127 million. This budget was adopted at $128.5 million. So there was a change, and let me explain how that change went about. So the original budget included a 1% increase to the city side of the expenses and a 1% increase to the Board of Ed. So if the city was going to hold expenses control at 1%, we put that same criteria on the Board of Ed. Keep expenses at a 1% increase to expenses. That equated to like a 4% tax increase, and the mill numbers were whatever the mill numbers are. The mill rate is a complicated process within itself. It's better to think about things, in my mind, is whatever you paid last year in taxes, the budget was proposed at a 4%, plan on paying 4% more. Forget the mill rate, how all that math works. 4% more than what you paid last year. That's what we put together.
Well, we use the mill rate when we start comparing what other communities are actually paying in taxes, and we discussed this last week. The disparity in what we have to pay in property tax and what some of the other communities, particularly in Fairfield County, would actually pay in property taxes, or in Bridgeport, another community that's really hit. So in communities where your businesses have basically dried up, and most of your tax revenue is dependent upon personal property tax, we're hit really hard.
Yes.
And that's really kind of when the state is beginning to look at the disparity, particularly in the mill rate. If our mill rate was cut down, because right now it's about 40-something, 41.
Approved mill rate for this year came in at exactly, if you're in the town, 41.39.
41, right.
And if you're in the CCD, 48.06. That's a big number.
And we happen to be in the 48.6. Well, when you have, if our mill rate now was at 35, it would be a lot easier for a lot of people to stay in the city.
Yeah, basically what you're saying is that, relatively speaking, if our standard of living, if it were comparable with other places, that we should be in that rate. Now, that is
that's the income side.
Right, that's kind of an extreme though, because at the other extreme, you also have to provide services.
Right.
And education, as well as safety. And so now the question is, how do you balance that? if you're not going to raise your mill rate.
Especially with our education.
And that's the challenge that Norwich has. You know, in terms of this mill rate, what has occurred over the past several years has been the property values have come down.
That's correct. Yes.
And there has been no improvement in revenues. The grand list has not gone up.
And that
it
because
hasn't grown. And
Yes.
you know, from my experience in year one, so this is the first year I've really dove in deep. You know, I was drinking the budget from like a fire hose,
Right.
trying to get the best understanding I could. And the conclusion I've reached about what our biggest challenges are, and as much as there are some places that could be trimmed on the expense end, city runs pretty lean. It really does. It's a revenue problem.
And-
it really is a revenue problem. Certainly we can create more efficiencies, but there is not any quick fix in this budget in terms of expenses. There are some longer term challenges. There are some ways that we could create, lower some expenses, but it would cost money up front.
Right.
You got to build in the efficiencies, whether that be technology, whether that be some cross training with staff, whether that be sharing of equipment, but that it requires an
yeah,
initial
of course,
expense,
we-
and that would
yes.
affect this year's budget.
Yes.
Right.
And it's a challenge to think 3 years out. People are reluctant to do it. Everyone, generally speaking, when it comes to a budget, is looking at what am I facing right now, rather than saying, hey, let's take a step back, let's look 3, 5 years down the road, and let's start focusing on that rather than the immediate problem. With that in mind, the budget was approved at that last meeting in June. I have staff meetings every other week with every department head in the city of Norwich. And the minute this budget was done, my message at the staff meeting was, we got to start working on next year's now, because there is no reason to think this is going to get any better.
Well, if you say that there's going to be an expectation of 4% increase in mill rate every year, and looking at that at our side, like you said, here's our property. It is not going up. As a matter of fact,
went
values
down
of
in
our
value.
houses are going down.
Yes.
But the
And then
taxes
we-
on it went up.
And the taxes of it went up. And it's not like if we live down in the shoreline or somewhere close to New York that you'd say, oh, well, the house is double in value, so I don't mind putting in another 4%. But that is one of the issues that we have here in Norwich, and that is that you can only tax so much on so few people. There is no, hopefully we will have growth, we will have factories and so on.
But again, you can't predict that.
And that is the complete
And so
unpredictability.
when you are beginning to look at next year's budget, you have some real issues to face, because I'm sure you've heard the anger. We did not go to the public hearings for the budget. What was the turnout like for that, for both of them? The first
We went to
one?
the first one.
There's a limited few that generally show up council meetings that have voice very important concerns on a regular basis, and then there was a pretty strong showing from the parents and teachers with
Because of
regard,
the
because the
education.
original proposal again to the educational budget, we had at 1% in this. Now here's what happened so then the budget went to the council. So the council wanted to improve the Board of Ed funding greater than it was. I think it needed to be a little further north, but we needed to find a starting point. So what the council then asked me to do is to further reduce the city side. So we had a 1% increase. We cut that back to a 0.5% increase to all of city expenses. So talk about holding the line. Boy, things were really tight there. And then with those savings, we allocated that along with a little bit of an increase to the revenue, to what the expenses would be for the Board of Ed, fund the Board of Ed a little stronger, so that the Board of Ed actually saw a 4% increase as compared to the 6% they were proposing, and that took the city's 4% budget that I had proposed increase to around a 6% increase. Additionally, what we were able to do to mitigate some of the impacts in the CCD was we took a real close look at how the utilities contribution, the 10%, pilot payment in lieu of tax that goes back to the city. We wanted to make sure that was allocated as fairly as possible to where if we were taxed, where would that money be going? It's generally in the CCD. All of our
Right.
facilities, the wastewater treatment plant, everything at South Golden Street, we have a
Right.
20 megawatt electric generator there. It's worth a lot of money if it was taxable. So let's make sure that those taxes go to the benefit of the CCD where it's all located rather than the general fund. So we took a real close look at that this year, and we were able to mitigate the impact on the CCD increase as compared to the TCD. So the TCD went up, and the CCD actually, even though it went up, it was less than it was last year. You still got a big number there,
We still have a
but
big
it's
number.
less.
No, the mill rate, that's the difference between the CCD and the outside of the CCD. There is that difference, and in our case, you mentioned about, what, 4% of mill rate? I mean, 4 points?
7
This-
7%.
Yeah,
7 mils.
right.
right.
The
No.
town is
The town.
41.
Yeah,
That's right.
The city
is 48.
48.
is 48.
So what does that 7% pay for?
So that's by
In the
and
CCD,
large.
yes.
By and large, you're paying for the salaries and benefits of the Norwich Fire Department, the career fire department that
Right.
exists here in town. Everything else gets allocated to the general fund. So the volunteers, general fund, all of the equipment, the fire marshal's office, the fire chief's salary, administrative staff, all of that goes to the general fund. The only thing that's different would be the salaries of the career fire department that gets applied to the
But
CCD.
that money is also used to purchase equipment.
No.
for the,
No,
Nope, nope,
no.
no, it isn't. The
It isn't.
only thing,
No.
it's $7.2 million, and with what it costs in salaries and benefits and everything else, health insurance and all that, pension associated with the salaries of the Norwich Fire Department. Equivalent to that on the TCD side, the town, there's an additional like $500,000 that they pay for that pays for, one, there's a tax abatement. If a volunteer firefighter makes X amount of calls and participates in X amount of drills, he gets a reduction in his tax bill. I think that firefighter sees about $1,000
$1,000,
off.
And
And then
but
there's a
that's not-
pension fund that kind of works.
Right, that's not on their assessment, though.
No, that's cash, right.
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 I mean, that's a big difference.
Yeah,
I
that
mean,
does make a big
it's
difference.
I mean, if it were on the assessment of their property, I wouldn't have as much of a problem with that. But the fact that it is, I mean, for seniors, it comes off their assessment. I mean, so it does not provide, or for veterans, it's the assessment. So $1,000 or $1,500 being taken off of your assessed property value, which is then taxed at that 48 mill rate, never comes out to be $1,000 ever, not even close. I mean, there's that doesn't seem quite fair.
Here's what you need to understand about that assessment, about that $1,000 incentive. Without the volunteers here in the city of Norwich, the taxes would be through the roof, and you would not be able to provide. And that's just not in the volunteer districts. That includes the CCD.
Right.
Last week on Oak Street, there was a multi-alarm structure fire,
Right.
and that required the combination of the career firemen and the volunteers to stop that fire. On the second floor, they saved the building. It's rehabitable. They can rebuild it. It's not burnt to the ground. It's not a big ugly mess, and no one got hurt. The city's taxes would be through the roof. You would not financially be able to have a paid fire department throughout this entire community. It's too large to do it, and it would require too much of staff. So, and then just to characterize things, I was a volunteer fireman for 28 years here in the city with the Taffel Fire Department. And when I joined, when I was 18 years old, there was a waiting list. They had 60 members, and there was a waiting list. That's not the case anymore. The training has dramatically changed. It's a huge commitment, and to get that $1,000 incentive, you got to pay your dues. You got to get up at 2 a.m. in the middle of the night.
Right.
You got to leave your wife and family for this amount of training, which generally takes place on the weekend. So there's a lot that goes with that. I think that's well earned and well deserved for those that do that. And people might not like the way the equation works, but it's a system, because attracting
Right.
and retaining volunteers is a challenge right now.
And we are, all of them. I have always, I mean, when I get the request for donations from any of the volunteers, that comes at least once a year.
Yeah.
And I have no problem, because I do appreciate them. However, that's not really the issue, although that they've tried to make it the issue when it came to the tax. And I don't think that it is, because you and I both know that our paid fire department it is not just the volunteers that contribute to this community, the whole community.
Absolutely.
And the fact that it is only the city that has to take the burden of our fire protection in this community, because you've just said we could not have the kind of fire department that's needed. We couldn't support it.
Not at all.
But to have it all on the back of the few residents that still make a commitment to the downtown, to the CCD, is not fair. And that's just my opinion. And why people are so, they don't want to talk about it because they don't want to hurt the egos of the volunteers. For whatever reason, our volunteer chiefs are so afraid that the paid chief somehow is going to incorporate them. We all understand what the system is like. I mean, I think we all understand and appreciate all of our fire departments, but we don't appreciate having to take the burden, and it's not a fair burden. But to get back to the budget and the rest of it.
I would like to respond to some of the things you just said.
Sure.
Because, when I stepped into the plate as acting city manager, I met with the mayor and council members and, wanted to set out what the expectations were for me. Did you need me to just keep things afloat? They said, no, there are some certain things we want you to get done. One, get this budget done and keep the tax rate as low as possible. And the second thing is the relationship between the career department and the volunteers had eroded through that thing, and they said they want that fixed. So what I've done since then is twice a month, every other week, every single volunteer chief, along with the career chief and I, we meet. And we've set up a whole series of goals. We've cultivated the relationship back together again, where all the things that you described do not exist anymore.
That's great.
So that has happened. And now, because we've got to a certain platform right now where things are back working together, where last week, there was a full assault of volunteers and career fire departments working together, putting it out without a single argument, without anyone worrying about anything. That worked fine. We're standardizing responses citywide. So concerns that you have about that, are now being addressed citywide with a standard response, standard training protocols, pre-plans for some of these buildings are now being vetted out with all 6 fire chiefs. So, because in any kind of problem-solving situation or an issue, one man's answer is never as good of a team approach to a solution. And that's what we're applying with this. Team solutions, team approach, more heads are better than one, and let's all agree on the final thing and then go that way. So that's what we have been doing. So that situation that you just described has been corrected by far.
That's great, and I'm glad we have a platform here to actually let people know, because you don't hear about that. What you do hear about is, or we did hear about, were all the problems.
Well, that's all anecdotal stories, back and forth, but that's never been documented.
Well, those are just the facts that I shared.
Right.
Those are the facts.
Right.
So let's move on,
Yep.
because I want to talk to you more about the CCD. In addition to what the CCD residents support, what are all those structures of nonprofit organizations? So we have the hospital, we have churches and state, I think, services. Now, they do give back services for the city citizens, and that is a positive thing.
We get payment in lieu of taxes,
In lieu,
but
exactly.
it doesn't match what they would be paying.
Have we presented this to the state and say, hey, listen, this is what we have in the city of Norwich, and we are not getting any more participant in paying us with the taxes, but yet we are supporting these structures, and should we apply for some kind of grant money for this?
I'm not aware of, I dove into this in February, so I'm not aware of any state programs or, what kind of legislation you would creatively put in place to solve that problem. What I can tell you is that, whether Bacchus Hospital is located in the CCD and not paying any taxes, or if it was located, in the center of Taffville and wasn't paying any taxes, it doesn't make a difference
Right.
to the CCD. It still would be applied. Those taxes would come into the general fund and be spread everywhere.
Exactly.
We're
So-
getting our share of expenses, though, from the CCD residents. In any case, we'll move on.
So what was the second public hearing like?
Well,
Aside from the Board of Ed, because I'd like to talk a little bit about that too. But
so at that time, by the second public hearing, the city this was Exhibit 2, where, we crafted the changes that the council had asked me to do at that point. And again, that reflects, all these reductions to every single department throughout the city, including the volunteer fire departments, all had to slash their budget by 0.5% to total that up to about, $250,000 in reductions. And then we, allocated that over back to the Board of Ed. So by that time, this had already been done, this Exhibit 2. So the council only really changed things once with this budget. This was the only time they changed anything. They had ample opportunities to make other changes. And as far as the very last minute, when they were getting ready to vote on it, that did not occur. I think they were generally happy with it. And at the public hearing, I think it was a total of a half an hour maybe of public comment. So it went relatively quick. If you get 3 minutes to speak, so what was it, 10 people?
yeah, the Board of Ed, I'm not surprised because there was, when you look at how much of our Board of Education budget is made up of grants. I mean, actually, our general fund is only paying for 40% of our entire school budget. I mean, or,
Correct. That's what
that's
people-
not, they don't really understand that. And I think that we had Abby on here, our superintendent of schools, obviously before the budget had been adopted and when they were still trying to negotiate with NFA over that increase of, 1.6 million? It was over, it was close to that. I don't remember the exact figure, but it was around that. And I mean, that increase, it was devastating from kindergarten through 8th grade. I mean, it devastated the school budget. I mean, they could not cut another penny out of that. Already, our school systems don't have the same advantage that our schools had when we were growing up. Music, art, dance, there was a whole array of other programs besides your basic science and math. And our science programs were wonderful. I remember going from Buckingham School to Hartford for a science exhibit that I did, and I mean, I think I came back with some prize, but I had done this in-depth analysis of different cancers. So I mean, I know the dedication of most of our teachers, and I know the kind of effort they put into the science programs, and Rotary has supported some of these science awards and competitions the Norwich Public Schools participate in, but it just does seem like most of the people don't recognize that it's only 40% of the monies that we're putting into our education that's paying for everything our kids are getting.
Out of everything that I just described, the 128 million, all that, what the taxpayers here in Norwich total are paying for is $70 million. That's all they're paying for. With all the grants that come into the city that subsidize all other things, 40% of that Board of Ed, it's, I think, what the hell, out of, what's the Board of Ed? We're actually only paying for $40 million is what we're paying for the taxpayers. The rest of it's all grants. The city's general fund is only $23 million. So you got this big mill rate trying to gin up $70 million bucks. That's what it's doing right there. And in terms of, the Board of Ed and how that works and the programs and all that, I'm not an educator. All I know is that, right now there's, test scores and different things that everyone focuses in on to figure out where the school ranks and rates. Norwich has a lot of challenges in the community. We have a very diverse community. I've learned so much that I didn't know before. If you have more than 20 children in the school system that speak a certain language, then you have to set up a special program for that. And that's
It's
the right thing
mandated.
to do.
Right.
But that stuff all costs money. And again, I don't know enough about that, but what I do know is this. I'm a product of the Norwich school system. I'm a product of NFA. And I was able to go on and go through Three Rivers, which at the time it was Thames Valley Community College, which I think is a little jewel this community has, and go on and get a bachelor's degree in engineering and a master's degree in business. My two children, my two boys, are a product of the Norwich school system. They're a product of NFA, and they're both in college right now, and one in the UConn School of Engineering. So if I could use that as the judge of how the school system's doing, I think it's doing all right. But I guess, the professionals rely on numbers, and they have to standardize things, and that's the way they go about it. But, from what at least I've experienced and witnessed within my own home, I think things got to be going all right.
We do agree with you, especially with NFA. All three of our children really earned their first year of college through NFA. Only one of them took advantage of all those credits, but all three had their first year of college. And when you consider that any child that graduates that wants to go to college can actually earn their first full year of college credits by the time they graduate from NFA, if they took advantage of it. And that kind of a savings for a parent who really wants to see their child succeed is well worth it. But as we talk about all the money that is needed, and you're beginning to look at next year's budget, what are some of the solutions?
So here's a couple opportunities that we're faced right now. One, there are some organized labor contracts that we're negotiating right now. We're in the process of negotiating, but some of those things that have been brought forth as proposals from a management standpoint include continued consolidation, sharing of resources that the bargaining unit contracts, don't provide for right now. So those are things that, I believe are important. We should have some success dealing with those. So those will, help hold expenses close to where they are today while still providing the services. So that's where we got to get creative here. How can we do more with the same amount of money? Maybe not do more with less, because I had their expenses are tight. Everything right now that's going to get built in needs to be done through creating efficiencies and in revenues. The revenue, it's a revenue problem. It's not as much as of expenses. There are opportunities. So we're focusing in on places like that. We're reallocating some of the police cruisers are being allocated to other departments. They have a lot of miles on them, but there are other departments that don't put a lot of miles on a police cruiser and doesn't need the reliability and the dependability and the pursuit tactics and equipment that might be on a police. We don't need the G-rated tires, for that. We can go with just a conventional radial tire on the cruiser when it gets reallocated to another department. So there's a lot of things like that we just got to keep drilling and drilling and drilling down into.
Because I recognize how much has been given up already by almost all the departments. We have not increased our police force, and they've done an incredible job of reallocating and doing business differently. The community policing, and I think they do a great job at that. But I also recognize that they've never had a full component for a number of years now. I don't know about the fire department, but whether they are full complement, but the public works, and public utilities. I work with these departments a lot with a different hat, with Rotary. So I know how much they go out of their way to make sure that the public is well served. So I've never had a complaint about a single one of our departments. They have been wonderful. But there were two questions that were submitted to us through Facebook. One of the first one that came in, and you started to touch on this. I'd like to know why the fire chief got his tax increase passed through utilities disguises. We shouldn't be spending what we don't have. How about more business and less taxes?
Okay, so the fire chief. So remember what I said earlier. The actual mill rate for went down. It's still high. You're still paying more than the town, CCD, but it went down by 2.3%. So if everything would have remained equal, it would have been that much more
Right.
you would have been paying. So that didn't happen, what that person's suggesting there.
Well, I think that he was, again, he was probably referring to the fact that the paid fire department was looking at spreading out the CCD tax.
Yeah, that was, I believe that was the fire department. That was a proposal by the
Right, but
mayor and council some while
He's
ago.
blaming the fire department for doing that, which is obviously also not true. And he's saying that he got his tax increase anyway by having the money from utilities. I think that was at least some relief for us that don't feel that, the whole tax should be just on the shoulders of those that live in the CCD. So thank you for...
So some relief was provided this
Some
year.
relief was provided. Not a lot for those of us who have to pay that additional 7 mils, but thank you. And he says, how about more business and less taxes? And I think that that's what you're referring to. It's the revenue side.
That's what we need.
Yes.
So there
if
are a
he
lot
has-
of things that are being worked on there. Let me just explain that. So, the good news is the Panema Mill. That's going to become taxable property. The investment's going to happen there. The developers, lining up all the permits at this point. So that's good news there that's, moving forward. Our business park, that's pretty much full. People don't realize that. They drive through there and the buildings, there's like one empty building up in that business park right now. They don't all employ a lot of people. So when you drive by, you see an empty parking lot, but the building's being taxed, and there's a lot of equipment in there that's being taxed. So they're full. One of the vacant buildings, the old Cybron building, is now being occupied by, Connecticut Beverage, that being Mr. Brown's business there, where he's bottling and producing some black currant juice and all kinds of different things, and then he has a sub-market where he's doing. So the business park is full. It's generating taxes. Those things are good. And then a lot of the work that the community development groups do, that being, the Norwich Community Development Office, and then NCDC, Norwich Community Development Corporation, who, absent, the focus and on that, then nothing would be happening.
Right.
And I know there's a lot of criticism about, what are we paying NCDC to do this for? If they weren't doing that stuff, no one would be. So there wouldn't even be the opportunity to grow the revenues. So, that focus needs to continue to happen. There's the zoning proposed changes that will be going to public. They're being reviewed by the Commission on the City Plan. After that, there'll be a public hearing by the council, and then presumably the council will either approve or tweak the zoning changes, which will provide for more commercial space in areas for mixed use in all different areas around the community. That didn't exist. We're kind of built out here. There's not anything in the business park where you can really expand or build out anymore. So, Norwich is densely developed by far, and what hasn't been developed is zoned for residential use for good reason. I mean, I don't think you want, any kind of, commercial business on the top of Scotland Road in one of those open fields, but there are some areas in the downtown that could, work together with housing and mixed use and some light commercial or light general purpose type of business. And,
Right.
that's the way we got to go now.
Okay, the other question came in, and she wanted to know why certain people are getting raises while the school system is suffering. And again, I think we touched on that. I don't think many people got...
There are contractual raises. If a bargaining unit had that in place, that occurred. That was built into the budget. The school system by large had, the teachers had salary changes that were negotiated. With salary changes, that's a give and take. I mean, the teachers, I believe, out of all the city bargaining units, pay the highest copay for insurance, like around 24%. That's by far the highest out of anyone. So, I don't think anyone's doling out money anywhere here in city government with employees.
Right.
And
I know that with the newspaper article that came out, this was months ago, could have been 6 months ago. I'm sure you know the one I'm referring to, where the headlines were 30 people in the city are making over $100,000. And I can understand why that would be so shocking to somebody that is working for $8 an hour. And we have a community that I think their wage scale is so below what it was in the past that they are shocked by seeing $100,000. That, to me, I'm saying thank God, because I know people criticize the unions, but if it weren't for the unions, nobody would be getting any raises. You have to be, I believe this. I know that it's not I'll get lots of bad email over saying this now, but it's not the unions that caused the problem. There isn't one company around here that I can point to. Well, EB. EB is a good example to me of a company where your CEOs are making multi-million dollars, are basically living off of our tax dollar. If EB actually produced something that I could purchase, that everything wasn't, they are simply a government contractor. They do not manufacture a single thing that I can buy. They don't even manufacture something that they could put out for the general public that's above my pay scale could buy. You know, so when you have a contractor that is making multi-million dollars for their CEOs and all of their executives, and feel nothing about laying off people. If you do get a job at EB, it is not secure. You can get good pay, I think, for a period of time, but you know, if they were given, but I think that's the general problem, that we have in this country. The thing that has happened is everyone accepts that it's business's job to make a profit. That's the definition of what they're supposed to do.
Your number one responsibility is
There's
increase
nothing
the
wrong.
shareholders' wealth.
Yeah, there's nothing
The
wrong with
investors'
that.
wealth.
And increase the investors' wealth.
There is something.
At what cost?
Exactly. There is something wrong with it when it is at the cost of our democracy, because as soon as the rest of the middle class deteriorates down to where you used to have a lower middle class and those that really were struggling, you now have the middle class that is dropped drastically, so that for a salary of, for someone to make $100,000, they're able to at least buy their house. They'll still have a mortgage. I doubt that anybody that makes $100,000, well, maybe they could, depending if they just, maybe they could. Okay, we have our first call tonight. Okay. Let me take the call.
Okay.
Hi, you're on Norwich Confidential. Hello?
Well,
I think I pushed the wrong button.
Oh.
I did push the wrong button. That's my fault. Please call back. I'll answer it and give you right over to John.
So your comments on, you know, the $100,000 in terms of that, don't forget, you need to be making that much to be able to afford a house in the CCD and pay the $8,000 of taxes.
Right.
okay.
Hi, you're on Norwich Confidential. Hello?
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I was calling in regards to, I've been listening to your show periodically, and I haven't heard anybody talk about the main things that are going on with racial profiling.
You think there's a big problem with racial profiling?
I think there's a serious problem with racial profiling in Norwich, Connecticut. You don't believe that there's a problem with racial profiling?
No, I actually, we had our police department on here because of some of the concerns. Did you see that show?
No, I didn't.
Okay. I'd be happy to have our police department come back on again and we can talk about it. In the meantime, you can message me on Norwich Confidential on Facebook. If you want to give me some very specific examples or specific questions that you want to have us address. But for tonight, while we have the city manager here, has this ever come up with you?
You know, as long as I've been manager for this short period of time, I haven't had any complaints with respect to that. A lot of things have happened across the nation, though, as from February till now, and the police department has taken that very seriously in terms of upping their training, refreshers on things, making sure that all the checks and balances are in place to be sure that they're following things in a methodical and logical way.
Right.
So they're taking this very, very seriously.
Right.
I can
I
assure you that.
Okay, there was some issues that there was a gentleman being tased just recently, and I just don't see that you guys are taking this matter seriously as a council member. And I'm a taxpayer here, and I have gotten harassed by the Norwich Police Department, not just once, not twice, practically all my life. So, but it seems to me that it's gotten worse from today, and it's almost like slavery, that I'm being harassed, I'm being tormented, I'm watching Afro-Americans, people of color, that is being violated. Just recently, my son was just violated by the Norwich Police Department. So if you guys feel that there's not a problem, you guys should actually maybe take a better look at the situation, because the situation is really bad.
Okay,
Well, I think what your point is that we probably should take a better look at this, like you said, and the thing that we can do is that we can come down and visit you, and maybe you can give us the specifics and the responses and so on, and we'll present it here, and we'll have our police department also come down here in the show, and we'll make this presentation. So that it will be known to everyone.
Get in touch with us on Facebook, okay? Norwich.
Well, what is you don't have any thing that you need to say about the racial profiling? All you're kind of doing to me is just blowing me away.
I'm not trying to do that. No, I'm not trying to do that.
But you're not answering any questions. I mean, you have the city council member there. He's
the city manager.
Council member,
No, he is not.
He
Hold
doesn't have
it.
any input about what the racial profile is about.
Hold it. He's the city manager. He's not not the city council member. But one of the things that, again, it's very difficult. You're calling. I don't know your name. And both my husband and I will come over and talk to you, and so that we can find out what's really going on. Okay?
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Okay.
I'll send you my information on Facebook.
Okay.
And hopefully...
I'll be in touch, trust me, okay?
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you for calling.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Which one? Okay, we just got another question on Facebook.
Great.
What is the financial plan for ensuring the Chelsea Gardens project can be sustained now that clear cutting of land in the park has been ensued with expired permits?
Yeah, I think the Chelsea Gardens is a 503C.
Yes.
The city is not the city has a lease. They lease them the property. They have a plan. I'm not certain that it's not to my knowledge that any permits have been expired. They've gone through a process and dotted every I and crossed every T. And I guess if there's any question to that, there's a venue for all that to take place, and that would be in the legal system.
Right.
That wouldn't be in City Hall. That would be in the legal system, the same way as if you didn't like something your neighbor was doing in your backyard, who owned a piece of property or was leasing a piece of property and did something you didn't like. There's a process for that to go down. There's the same process for Chelsea Gardens.
Right. Another example of leased property is the marina. Now that it is no longer part of the contract that was originally negotiated and sold to the city. I thought really should have bought that property for the price. I mean, it was
Yeah, the
dirt
structures,
cheap.
that property.
Right.
Yes.
So now it's owned by this group in Boston. Are they still only paying $1 in taxes?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that question. I
Okay.
do not know that. I know this. I was part of the team that looked at the piece of property to determine whether it made sense for the city to buy it. And I was part of that team that said, I don't think we should be buying it, because as I was describing earlier, to get it to where it would be today, it needed an investment. So a lot of these, 5-year out things need money up front. And, you're looking at this budget here, and how many money up front, to make investments. So we got to be very wise about where we do it. And when you had, private equity ready to do that, freshen the place right up, it's wonderful. They painted it, they cleaned it up. The restaurant's running fine. There's boats down there. Place was packed the other day with the fireworks, and it's busy there every day for lunch. So if private equity was able to do that, let them do it, and let the city government stay out of it.
At $1 a year?
Well,
Okay.
You were the
And I'm not
city-
sure about that.
You were the
Maybe that's
council
case, I
manager
do not know.
when it was approved, Bonnie, so
Okay.
it's just going back to you. Now, I get a minor question, and I was just talking to Bonnie about this. Our refuse collection.
Yes.
Now, the city used to be doing this,
Yes.
and from what I understand, are we still doing this, or are we outsourcing
It
this?
is 100% outsourced. So,
Yes.
and that happened some years ago.
Yes.
City Public Works stopped collecting garbage, and it went to contractors. If you lived in the town district, you had to hire your own contractor to do
Right.
it. You figure it out. There were a lot of mom and pop guys with a truck, and and things weren't as complicated as they used to be with watching what was being collected, and it all just kind of got dumped at a dump.
Right.
And covered over with sand. That's not the case anymore. So then, the city went toward contracting for all of that collection. 2 different contracts, one in the town, a second one in the CCD. Then just recently went out to bid with one contract, went out to bid for one contractor to do it all, and move to automated collection so that, we can get some benefit. We believe it's going to be more cost effective to do this, not just for the contractor, but we're seeing some of that roll back to the city in terms of reducing expenses for the long term. So that is a place where we did make some long-term decisions, making that you might not see all the benefit in year 1 or year 2, but you will see it further on down the road.
Well, as long as we don't get our refuse tax increased, then we're happy
No,
with
there
it.
isn't any
There
tax.
isn't. There's no refuge
That's all in
tax.
the general fund.
Right.
It's 100% in the general fund.
Right. But with the recycling, do we get any income back from that?
Yes, and the expectation is that with the ease of doing it now, with the larger containers and all that, that will improve. We're going to measure that. We've got some metrics in place that we're looking at. We're watching. I mean, this is the first week that we're actually doing
Right,
the recycle,
right.
so we got to collect
Yes.
a little more data. But
Right.
this is we are measuring that. There are metrics that have been put in place. Barry Ellison, the Public Works Director, has done
Barry
an
is
outstanding
incredible.
job. And Barry Ellison, the Public Works Director, will soon be a public utility employee, if you haven't known that.
No.
So that's that's a win-win, I think, for the city. He's an outstanding construction manager, and that's just going to continue to foster city government working together. You have someone who understands construction, understands the roads of Norwich, can manage a large group of people, coming over for different opportunities in our, gas and electric and construction stuff, yet still understands this whole other picture where we're just going to continue to foster efficiencies, like I was talking about earlier. Here are the places we got to
Right.
focus in on.
So who will be taking over?
That job's currently being advertised.
Okay.
So we'll look at
They
what
better
the
be
pool
as
of
they better be as
applicants
good
look.
as Barry
He's
Ellison.
done an
though.
outstanding job.
He's incredible. We only have about 5-6 minutes left, but this went by very fast. But I would like to just maybe talk about just briefly, or you can recommend that someone else to come in and talk about it. But for public utilities, I have I think both Ben and I.
Well, we're concerned about, one good thing that we do have is that we have our own backup system for electricity. And for the first time in, I would say 40 years that we've lived in our place, Bonnie, that the other night or last week was the first time that
2
we
weeks
had...
ago.
Yeah.
He was scheduled to be on the
23rd.
show.
That's right.
The
Yeah.
23rd.
It was-
Right.
And
A
our
blackout,
right-hand
that-
man, our operations manager,
right.
was away on vacation, so like I was up
That's-
all night that
You
night.
were
That's
up
right,
all
yeah.
night.
So no wonder it took you a long time to put our power back then.
So,
It usually takes less than an hour.
so here's what happened on the 23rd. So you wake up in the morning like you do this morning, and you know the weather forecast is predicting severe thunderstorms in the afternoon, like we have predicted right now, and those sometimes happen, sometimes don't happen. So your approach to all that is much different than when the weather forecasters are saying you have a hurricane coming, it's going to happen this Friday.
Right.
You have plenty of time to. So we were as prepared as we were for a little lightning storm. We experienced within 15 minutes hurricane damage and everywhere around the city. These microbursts occurred. We had broken poles. We had as many broken poles that Tuesday than we did in Storm Irene.
Okay,
We
this
had
is
that
a
many
good-
broken poles.
This is
so
a good
it took a little while.
segue into climate change.
Yes.
This is an excellent segue into climate change. And our concern that if we do not get off fossil fuel, like immediately, they keep saying, well, we will be off of fossil fuel by 2100. And every scientist has said that's 70 years too late. And the consequences of what that does to our ability to continue to live on planet Earth without having real disastrous consequences are real. And people are not taking them seriously. One of the things that I am very, very happy with, well, not very happy because you've only had 5%. Only 5% of our energy has actually been produced here in Norwich.
That's growing, of green energy.
Green energy.
But that's growing.
Yeah.
And
It
that's
is growing.
with our plan for the solar garden.
Okay, we are. I just got the
Oh,
signal
okay.
to
All
wrap
right.
it up. Will you come back?
And I'd
or
like to
send-
bring back some staff too, if I can. And
That
I
would
can bring
be
a couple
wonderful.
key people that can really shed some good light on this stuff. I'm a green person myself. We need to change. There's way too many. The humans have had way too much impact on our environment, and we need to change earlier rather than later.
I'm going to have you back on. Acting City Manager John Bilda, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Pleasure.
And
Pleasure.
we will be back next Wednesday with Norwich Confidential.
And that was quite informative, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And
Okay, we'll see you next week.